So I paused here, right there. Own eyes, known to your children. So what would you say this author is based on those two passages? What is this author trying to assert? Laurie Kipnis, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Ron. um, I think that the author is trying to underline that a couple of things. You were there. You know this happened. You saw it with your own eyes. Now you have to take that experience and that feeling and pass the importance of it to your children and your children's children.
Okay, good, good. Thanks, Laurie. Anybody have anything to add? Margot and Emily, go ahead. First Margot, then Emily.
Thank you, Rabbi. I would extend what was just said and say that a fact has been established, one that hereforth should not be disputed. So it's not just a fictional narrative, as it were. It is supposed to stand as evidence.
Great, great, good, important, right? When you see it's you're not, your own lying eyes, right? Your eyes aren't going to lie to you. You saw it with your eyes. Now, of course, remember, we know that this is written hundreds of years after the events were purported to happen, but here this author is saying, this is Moses, putting the words in Moses's mouth and saying Moses is saying to the people in his, remember, Deuteronomy means second, it's the second telling of the law. So even in the author's style, the author is saying this is Moses retelling the accounts, looking at the Israelites and saying, your people saw this. Moses is telling you that you saw this, therefore you know it happened. So that's fact, what counts for fact in the minds of, or should count for fact in the minds of the reader. Yes, excellent, thanks. Emily. You're muted, so go ahead and hit the mute button.
Okay,
There
hi, there you are. I couldn't find it. I'm on my phone. In addition to established fact, it's almost like a subtle insistence that even if you think you don't remember, even if you have doubts in your mind, actually it did. I won't say it's a form of brainwashing, but it's more of an establishment of, you think you have doubts, but no, you don't have doubts, because this text tells you that you don't have doubts.
100%, exactly, right. And that's certainly this. What we call, another word for this is it's establishment of a certain dogma, right? And the dogma is, if you read traditional Jewish sources, one of the proofs they'll give you is, look, and it's circular logic, but it works for more traditional Jews. But they'll say in their justification, and in fact, it's really interesting is that David Steinberg, the person I cited earlier, kind of calls his father out for the circular logic that his father gave. So, the Torah says that the Israelites saw it with their eyes, therefore it happened because the Torah says they saw it with their eyes. Right? Takes us around in circles, doesn't work in the modern context, but obviously in the writer's context, that writer believed it would work. Ken, and then we'll go to the next text.
Thank you, LeBron. So it seems to me that because this is the second generation after the first generation passed, in Moses's eyes, it's ke'ilu, it's as if this generation was the first generation in his imagination, and he wants to impress upon them the legacy of the event that the first generation actually witnessed. And we see this concretized in the V'ahavta a few chapters later, where we're obligated to pass on the teaching, as it says in the text, to our progeny. And so that's basically what I would like to say. Thank you very much for the session.
Yeah, great, perfect, beautiful. All right, so now let's look at the next text. So now let's put this in context. In terms of writing, this text up here was the second text, right? So this is the second text. This text is the first text. So this would be the first text that one would read, both also in the chronology of Torah reading itself. So all the people witnessed the thunder and lightning, the blare of the horn and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they fell back and stood at a distance. You speak to us. You speak to us, they said to Moses, and we will obey. But let not God speak to us, lest we die. Moses answered the people, "Be not afraid, for God has come only in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may be ever with you, so that you do not go astray." So the people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick cloud where God was. So there's a significant difference between these two passages. And remember, Deuteronomy comes after Exodus. So what is, now that you see these two texts put against each other, what's missing in the Exodus text the Deuteronomy text is trying to add? What's the significance of the differences between these texts that kind of comes that you can see as you read them? I know that was kind of a big question, but I'm going to let you process it a minute. So take a look at how the people respond. Oh, Margot, go ahead.
Thank you, Rabbi. It seems to me that we have all these details of the events, natural, we're supposed to conjecture that it is God, etc. But in the next one, all those details are just in your own eyes. So it has been subsumed into something, once again, that is supposed to be an established fact.
Uh-huh.
It's like a rock. We don't know all the different particles or sands that have gone to compose it, but we hold the rock in our hands. In fact, God is often called a rock, so.
Okay, thanks. Emily?
Yes, national revelation is missing in the second text, in the Exodus text.
Explain that. Natural?
National revelation.
Oh, national. Yeah, so exactly. First of all, there's fear, right? Yes, nice. So the people say, "We're afraid of God. You speak to us. We don't want to hear this, and whatever you say, we're going to obey." So it's very different from the first text where there's this sense of collective presence. And the second text is sort of like, well, no, like we don't know what to do with this. We're afraid. And Moses has to comfort them, but we don't really hear that they have this close connection to God. If you remember the Exodus account, thunder and lightning, they don't really see much with their own eyes. All they see is a mountain aflame. Whereas Deuteronomy kind of elides all of that and says, no, you saw something happen. You saw something profound. Doesn't say what, but you saw something, right? So, but what's also missing in these two texts, you should note, is any connection to this thing called Shavuot, right? So Sinai is presented as a separate event. The timing isn't given. It's not, we don't get this on the 50th day, the seventh week, the end of the seventh week after Passover. This is when Revelation happened. That's not ostensibly given to us in the text of the Torah itself. However, right, the weight of Sinai is is very important. So every religion has, at least every Western religion, and I would say maybe safely every religion, has its sort of revelatory, if that's the right word, moment of revelation, where God appears in some format to the people through some vehicle. For Judaism, traditionally it's become Mount Sinai. For Christianity, it's in the presence, the appearance of Jesus, God manifest on earth. For Islam, it's through the words of God revealed to Muhammad as taken into the Quran. You know, if we have whether it's in Buddhism, right? There's the personage of Buddha who appears. So every religion has some connection between the divine and humanity. Judaism, it's the word, it's the voice of God, it's Mount Sinai. And so it grows into centrality in the tradition. So if it's so central, if this moment of revelation is so central to the passage, to the linking with God, and the idea that God is manifest before the people, whether it's national, I like the way you pointed that out, Emily, it's a national apparition versus an individual. Look what happens here with this should be familiar passage from Deuteronomy 26, towards the end of Deuteronomy, the end of the Torah, where we get this mini history, right? When you're offering the first fruits at your Seder, well, it's said at the Seder, but offering your first fruits after the harvest, this would be around Shavuot, what are you supposed to say? The following. Arami Oved Avi, my father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. But there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to Adonai, the God of our ancestors, and Adonai heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery and our oppression. Adonai freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and by signs and portents. God brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the fruits of the soil which you, Adonai, have given me. What's going on here? So now we have this formulaic repetition that one is supposed to utter upon offering the first fruits of the harvest in the promised land, in the Holy Land. And there are no ellipses here. I didn't leave anything out. You're welcome to look this up in your own Bible. But from verse 8 to verse 9, we jump. We go from liberation to national identity. Sinai's missing. So how can we have a narrative of Jewish history that leaves out these two such significant events that they're repeated twice and they're elaborated on in two different ways that attempt to speak to the people from their context? And they talk about the importance of transmitting from one generation to the next. So now we have a formula that gives us this mini history of the Israelite path from Abraham to the present day, and it leaves out Sinai. How can we leave that out? What have we done? Have we gutted Jewish tradition, Jewish identity by leaving out Sinai? So how do we explain that is the question. And it really presents us with a dilemma. And fortunately, I think that modern biblical criticism gives us a way of understanding this that really digresses, all right, I guess that's the wrong, but separates itself from traditional Jewish interpretation.
Okay. Who is it?
Remember to mute yourself unless you want to talk to us. Otherwise, we're going to hear you talking to your dog or whoever you're talking to. All right. So interestingly, the Exodus story, the story of liberation, is ubiquitous. It's referred throughout. And in fact, it's even foreshadowed in Genesis 15, where Abraham creates a covenant with God, and God says to Abraham, Abraham is still Abram, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation they serve. In the end, they shall go free with great wealth. Right? So that's the classic Exodus narrative. That appears in Genesis. But again, there's no foreshadowing in the account of Abraham that says, and they will travel through the desert and they will see my presence. They will witness my presence and therefore be awed and follow me and know that I'm with them. It never says that. Interestingly, right here we have this progenitor of the Jewish people, this ancestor who's as we're told, Abraham and Sarah, the parents of the nation, and yet in God's promise to them, there's no reference to the giving of anything at Mount Sinai. No reference to the appearance at Mount Sinai, nothing. All right, so moving right along. And in fact, when we get to the book of Psalms, there's actually no mention in the entire book of Psalms of Mount Sinai as the place where Torah is given. How can it be? So central to Jewish identity, the entire book of Psalms, this is one of these few references to Sinai in Psalms. And all it says, and to be honest with you, I thought there was a typo in my text until I looked at every text. And because I look at verse 9, it says, Yan. I'm like, huh? What is Yan? I looked at the Hebrew. I tried to translate it. It says Zeh Sinai, okay, in the Hebrew. So, oh God, when you went at the head of your army, when you marched through the desert, Selah, the earth trembled, the sky rained because of God, Yan, Zeh Sinai, because of God, the God of Israel. So all we get is the earth trembled because of the God of Israel. But again, Psalms doesn't say, there we saw you, there you gave us your law, there you revealed the 10 Commandments, right? All it says is the mountain thundered and there it happened up there. The entire books of the prophets. Now think about that. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, pick your prophet. None of them mention events at Sinai as part of the giving of the law. I just want to kind of put the weight of this into your heads, if you would. Astounding that we have, as we've come to inherit the understanding of Shavuot, the central message of Shavuot is something happened on Mount Sinai. There was a revelation. And yet, apart from those two major paragraphs that I showed you, of course, and the stories around them in the Torah itself, the rest of the Bible barely mentions that event. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute because it's not a small point. Margot, go ahead.
Yeah, traditionally, a woman's identity was subsumed under her husband's, so either by taking the name or being known as Mrs. John Doe or whatever, because they were seen as a pair with his identity at the forefront. I'm wondering about the pairing of our Exodus and Zman Matan Torah as being, we know the Exodus, but we should automatically attach, as we do by the counting of the Omer and attaching it through the days, that it will be culminated with the giving of the law.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That's what later Jewish tradition absolutely does, right? But we're kind of peeling back. I like to say
Hmm.
that, if we think of Jewish tradition as like layers of an onion, right? When we peel away the layers and get to the core, what we find is that yes, the outer layers absolutely said Zman Matan Toratenu, 100%. The Omer became the count up towards Shavuot. Shavuot, right? We had our kindergarten consecration, and all the little kindergartners got their little baby Torahs, right? So we reenact the giving of the law through our Shavuot observance, even as progressive Jews who are, ambivalent about how actually Torah came into our hands. Some of us more ambivalent than others. But right, so yes, that was certainly the layer the Jewish tradition put on it. But I think what I, not I
I
think,
hear you.
yeah, what I'm trying to point out here is it's not at all evident in Torah. And remember, a lot of the Jewish tradition that we've come to embrace, and I think it's very important for us to recognize, certainly as liberal Jews, Jews within the context of what we call right Reform and even conservative Judaism, which is that Judaism is an evolutionary process. Remember, traditional Judaism says it was all revealed in its entirety at Sinai. Not one word can be modified. Follow exactly what it says. Modern Judaisms, progressive Judaism, say, no, 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 no. It's a continually evolving identity. And what we're seeing here is actually evidence from Torah that shows an inconsistency, a very essential inconsistency. And there's more coming. So wait, you're going to see even how well, I'll hold back. I'll refrain from giving away my punchline. I'll let you actually hear it. Okay, so let's now go to just move through my text here. So other texts, little mini histories. If you want to, Numbers 33 was kind of long, so I didn't include it. But if you want to look at Numbers 33, you'll hear about the retelling of the wandering in the desert of Sinai, but it leaves out Mount Sinai and the giving of Torah in the book of Numbers. It should be shocking to us that such a central event isn't given way more attention in the Torah itself. If indeed the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, if indeed the um the law was revealed and God revealed God's self to the people on Sinai, one would think that it would be highlighted throughout the Torah. One would expect that, and the prophets, if that were indeed commonly accepted across ancient Israelite tradition. Okay, so now let's look at Joshua 24. This one's a little longer, again, but I'll read it slowly. Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. He summoned Israel's elders and commanders, magistrates and officers, and they presented themselves before God. Then Joshua describes Abraham's journeys. Just want to, so Joshua is often given as the sixth book of the Torah. Give me a second. I'm just going to shut my door. There's some noise coming from downstairs. Yeah. So, excuse me. So Joshua now is assembling all the Israelites who've crossed into the land before the land is divided up, kind of setting them up for their movement throughout the land and to occupy the land. So then he says to them, so he gives them this mini history. Then I sent Moses and Aaron, and I plagued Egypt with the wonders, the signs that I wrought in their midst, after which I freed you. I freed your fathers from Egypt and you came to the sea, crossing the sea, your own eyes, there it is again, right? Your own eyes saw what I did to the Egyptians. After you had lived a long time in the wilderness, dot, 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 ellipses intentional, but you can again check me. Nothing reference, no reference to Sinai. Then you crossed the Jordan and you came to Jericho. I delivered them into your hands, and I have given you a land for which you did not labor and towns which you did not build, and you have settled in them. Now, therefore, revere Adonai, whoops, that's a little typo, revere Adonai and serve God with undivided loyalty. Put away the gods that your forefathers served before beyond the Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve Adonai. Or if you are loath to serve Adonai, choose this day which ones you are going to serve, the gods that your forefathers served beyond the Euphrates, or those of the Amorites in whose land you are settled. But I and my household will serve Adonai. I swapped out Lord. It said the Lord. I swapped out Lord for Adonai, but I forgot to delete the. That's why you see that awkward sentence structure there. So here Joshua is saying to the people, you are in the land. Why are you going to worship Adonai? Because Adonai was revealed to you, you saw Adonai on Sinai? No, he doesn't even reference Sinai. In fact, he says, you're going to revere, you're going to serve Adonai because Adonai gave you the land. So certainly in Joshua, the central act that Adonai performed for the Israelites, the central acts were redemption from Egypt, occupation of the land. What's missing from Joshua's account is Sinai. So it's huge. So here, I kind of reworked this last night as I had a little bit of an epiphany and I changed some things. So I want to just share these big questions, right? How does leaving out the Sinai narrative affect the nature of the human-God relationship as Judaism has traditionally understood it? That's a big question, right? So we have what it seems like we have is a stream of Jewish thinking, or I like to say, to call that Jewish is kind of a sort of a uh, out of context because they weren't really Jewish yet, they were Israelites. So a stream of Israelite thinking that says you don't need Sinai to have Adonai. You have a story of freedom, redemption, and then you have a story of entering the land. And those two things are your justification. Then we have another tradition that says, no, no, no. Your own eye saw the revelation. You witnessed God's presence on Mount Sinai. It says elsewhere in Exodus, obviously, that God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. What exactly God said, at least from the Torah's perspective, remains an open question. But you have these two streams that seem to be what we've revealed here is that they exist separately, and it almost as if one is not aware of the other. One says Sinai is what it's all about. The other says liberation, the land is what it's all about. So the question I want to kind of put out to you, and the word for the revelation at Sinai is called a theophany, when God is revealed, and there are other theophanies in the text. We're going to look at that. But is a theophany necessary for Jewish identity? Do we need Sinai to be Jewish? Could we exist without Sinai? Ryan, are you waving your hand? Yeah, okay. Remember, I just want to make sure if anybody else wants to speak, be sure to hit your raise hand so I see you. I happen to catch you out of the corner of my eye, so you're lucky. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, sometimes it picks up and auto raises it. It
Oh,
didn't that time.
got it, got it, got it.
So, yeah. So my thinking here is, if I'm remembering my Torah right, in this case, this would imply that there wasn't a Mosaic covenant, or one
Sorry,
could
say it
look at
again. I
it
missed
that
that.
way.
Say it again.
Revelation at Sinai in this case included the Mosaic covenant. Um, is my recollection. In Joshua and these others where there isn't a mention of that covenant, that's a significant omission. And obviously, the covenant that comes from Sinai is a very significant part of traditional Jewish thought and relationship.
Yeah, you actually bring up a really interesting point, which is the circumcision, the Brit Milah, the word covenant Brit, right, is thought to be a priestly introduction to Judaism, right? So it was the notion that as the priesthood evolved, it emphasized circumcision as a central Jewish form of identification. It's not 100% certain that it was everywhere. It became popular, but it certainly there were certain streams of Israelite identity that didn't involve circumcision at some point in ancient history. Yeah, so this notion of covenant, though, I think is good. Abraham has a covenant of circumcision. Abraham has a covenant between the flaming torch that goes through the split animals. Brit Ben Abetarim, it's called, between the pieces. The covenant of Mount Sinai, where the Israelites say, "We enter into a covenant with Adonai our God," right? So this idea of covenants, we focus so much on Brit Milah, but really there are several covenants in the text itself. Yeah. So is theophany necessary for covenant? From the perspective of Deuteronomy and Exodus, it seems that theophany is necessary. You have to see it with your eyes. You have to stand in front of the mountain. You have to agree to the covenant. Whereas from Joshua and that history, not necessarily, right? So it seems to downplay the nature of the covenant. Yeah, yeah, good point. Uh, Margot and Ken.
Yeah, thank you again, Rabbi. And I was thinking somewhat along the lines of Ryan, so thank you very much, Ryan. Um, we're taking possession of the land. Think of it as taking possession of a house. w- there needs to be some sort of a contract, or in this case, a covenant at work. And there are certain responsibilities of home ownership. It's also, aside from that contractual thing, there's a relational thing. So we were freed, but we're still infants in terms of a certain social maturity. I think we needed the revelation in order to assume these adult responsibilities that are inherent or incumbent as part of the covenant before we enter the land. So I think it's really important that we see it, as it were. That's the
Well,
way we sign it, by seeing it.
so yes, and I think we have to, the brilliance of Torah, and the reason we're probably still reading it today, among the many reasons, is that as it was seen together, it created a rich sort of, the word I like to use is mosaic, because the nature of a mosaic is when you look at it close, you see all the fragments. When you step back, you see a beautiful image, right? So Torah is a mosaic of different sources pieced together. And when we go close, like we're doing now, we see the differences. When you step back, you appreciate the dramatic beauty, right? So Jewish tradition without Sinai would be missing a significant chunk of what it means to be a Jew. So yes, it's been pieced together, and the rabbinic Judaism came along later and built it into our observance. So Shavuot became Matan Toratenu, whereas originally it wasn't necessarily clear. Originally, Shavuot was a harvest festival. You offer your fruits, right? You give thanks for your produce. That was what Shavuot was, and the Omer counting of the barley and wheat sheaves, right, was about the harvest. It wasn't really connected to Torah. Now, again, subsequent Jewish tradition added layers of interpretation, the themes for the days of the Omer, Kabbalistic interpretations, all built on that. But that's the beauty of our tradition, folks, and that's why I think this is so relevant. When we see how layers are added and what we've inherited, from my perspective, what it opens up for us is the realization that just as it was evolutionary then, it remains evolutionary now. There are those who would say you can't add, you can't modify, you can't change. There's a great show on Max, if anyone has seen it, called Reformed. It's a French series about a Reform rabbi um, in Strasbourg, France, and it's I'm a rabbi. I live this life. And let me tell you, it is probably one of the best done series about Judaism and the rabbinate and the challenges of a young rabbi. And she sort of encounters her best friend happens to be a traditional rabbi. And she makes the case for evolutionary Judaism. And of course, he stands against it. And they constantly go at it with each other in a sometimes humorous and creative way, but it's really done well and accurately. So yeah, that tension exists in Jewish tradition. Ken.
Thank you. So Margot mentioned the land, and it seems to me, I'm just thinking out loud right now, that the land is what is the mediating factor between the Israelites and their relationship to God instead of Matan Torah on Mount Sinai, because the myth is as they were entering the land, that is what is uppermost in their mind. And so settling in the land and having a relationship to land establishes a breach of sorts. And the other thing I want to mention is I'm not sure about my documentary hypothesis and which Jewish mishpatim is, whether it's J, whether it's J-E or E, and maybe the texts that have to do with Mount Sinai weren't so crucial in the Israelites' relationship to their text and their way of life. And maybe that's why the prophets don't mention it and so many other places don't mention it. But I'm not really sure about that. And maybe that's why the rabbis, when they were exiled, when the people were exiled, the rabbis wanted to reclaim Sinai because they didn't have the land anymore. And Davka, they needed to have a connecting thread. And that connecting thread was Matan Torah.
Yes, yes, yes. Nice. I'm going to take us back into my text because you gave me a beautiful segue. So this is a mistake here, folks. That parenthesis doesn't belong, so just get rid of that. But so we have the Isaiah text that we all know from the morning worship, Shabbat morning, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot. Then we have Ezekiel, who has a personal apparition. So what we get in exile, and this relates to what you said, Ken. What's fascinating is in exile, we get individual theophanies. Isaiah has a theophany, Ezekiel has a theophany. Whereas at Sinai, projected back, and that's why I asked that provocative question, history remembered or history created? That it seems that, and I think, Ken, your point is a really good one, that when the Israelites found themselves separated from the land, and the covenant seemed to be broken, what they needed to build up was a separate covenant that was transportable. And that transportable covenant was Sinai. It was the word, it was the law, it was right, and it was remembered we stood at Sinai. And so it became a covenant that could exist, even though it would appear, and remember, we're talking about 2,000 years of exile, even though it would appear that the covenant of the land was broken. So, and interestingly, who is the prophet, the one prophet that actually references Nehemiah is, called a prophet. It's the third section of the Bible, Ezra and Nehemiah. But when he's speaking to the exiles returning to the land, they have this discovery of Sukkot. That's a whole other lesson. You can find that on the Torah.com, about how Sukkot also seems to have been a strangely forgotten holiday that then has to be recreated in exile. That they read from the scroll of the teaching of Adonai, and he provides a lengthy biography of God and who God is. And Nehemiah brings back Sinai, and it sounds like Deuteronomy. Nehemiah is now addressing God. And this is familiar, the Exodus, you came down on Mount Sinai and spoke to them from heaven, right? So here's Nehemiah speaking to returning exiles and saying Sinai is really important because what we got on Sinai were rules and teachings, laws and commandments, and these practices, Shabbat, Sukkot, the rituals. Therefore, you should observe them because the covenant was made on Sinai. But it became a language of the exile. Okay, so in the essay that I drew a lot of this from in the Torah.com, the writer David Frankel brings two ways, many, but I pulled two ways of kind of interpreting and explaining how we can deal with these two traditions. So a scholar named Samuel Lowenstamm basically said it's not needed. The other histories just didn't need it. That the focus is on God's redemptive acts, the Exodus, crossing the Red Sea, but only by Second Temple times did law-giving, and that sort of follows with when Jews were exiled, law-giving became an essential Jewish Israelite theology. The problem with that interpretation is that Deuteronomy really is from before the Second Temple times, so it doesn't quite work. Deuteronomy sees the law giving not as it's an act of grace. God says, God did this for you because God loves you. Right? God loves you. So, but what Frankel suggests is that it seems like the Sinai narrative actually wasn't as widely known as the Exodus narrative, that it just wasn't as present for the average Israelite person and the Israelite community as Exodus was. Okay, so now I'm going to take you a little bit farther and give you a look at the prophets, because we actually have a profoundly contradictory perspective of how the Jews got law. So before Sinai was canonized, that is, before the Torah became a finished document and was declared complete and not modifiable, law giving was seen to be in the domain of the prophets. Now, just let you process that. There were prophets who existed during First Temple times. Prophets existed in Second Temple times. Prophets like Ezekiel existed outside of the land, and they were giving people rules. Ezekiel is famous for his priestly directions that he gave from Babylon. So here is Daniel, who says to the people, and Daniel's now written in Babylon, written in exile, we have not obeyed the voice of the Lord our God to follow God's teachings that God gave us at the hands of God's servants, the prophets. And mentions Ezekiel. So what begins to appear is that law giving was not a one-time event. It seems that certainly in the mind of many of the writers of the prophets and the prophets themselves, law giving was a consistent event. And one of the central problems with Torah, by the way, is it says Vayomer Adonai al Moshe Lemor after Sinai. So we even have law giving happening after the Israelites leave Sinai. So even in the Torah itself, there's a hint that this law giving was a continuing process. But what we have in prophets is direct references that law giving was an ongoing process. And we know the Torah wasn't codified, it wasn't canonized during the times of the prophets, so it makes sense. How does this religion develop? Well, these individuals called prophets come along and they say, God spoke to me and God told me you have to do this. God spoke to me, God told me you have to do this, and therefore, take my word for it. Here's Samuel. I told the people the regulation of kinship and wrote it in a book and placed it before the Lord. What is that? How is Samuel writing things down where he gets information that the people are to follow after Torah has theoretically been revealed? So what David Frankel's conclusion is that Sinai, Moses, the account, was elevated to it came along to undermine this practice of prophetic law giving. And it sought to create a unitary source of Jewish law. And then we have texts like Deuteronomy 13. Be careful to observe only that which I enjoin upon you. Don't add to it or take away from it. And it's also followed by the warning against false prophets. So what we have here is a tradition that allowed for continuing revelation through the vision of prophets. Its intention with a tradition that said, no, it was a single event that happened at one time and God spoke to. What's fascinating is that in terms of its own self-reflection, Judaism says, yes, it was a one-time event. That's what we've inherited. But it's contradicted by the words of the text itself, the Bible itself, right? So I think it speaks loudly to us as liberal Jews. So I'm going to throw out these two questions and ask you, you're the people, the Jewish people, how does this resonate with you? So if we say that historical Judaism posits two different processes for the existence of the law, what do you see as the implications? I'm going to just take a look at some of the chats because I see some of you would rather do it on a chat, which is fine. So Laurie said, or a way to give authority to the laws the prophets are bringing. This came from Sinai. Yeah. So the only thing is, Laurie, what's interesting is the prophets actually don't say that they got the word from Sinai. The prophets say, I got the word from God. God revealed it to me, which is problematic, especially as Christianity begins to rise. So remember how Rabbinic Judaism is evolving. Rabbinic Judaism is evolving in the shadow of a blossoming Christianity. And what's Christianity saying? There was a New Testament that was revealed to the followers of Jesus by Jesus and by God. So how is Judaism going to respond to that? Likely it's going to downplay the notion that subsequent voices can provide revelation. It's going to say, no, no, no. Revelation was a singular, solitary event that happened at one moment, and we're going to embrace the Deuteronomy and Exodus stories and downplay the prophetic version of history. And it was a way of Judaism inoculating itself, if you will, against the rise of Christianity. And if you're going to exist in diaspora, how much the more so? Are people now exposed to the words of Christians? They're living in Christian societies. What do? We need to say that no, the words that we have as rabbis, they came to us from Sinai. We now have a written Torah and an oral Torah. Both are revealed at Sinai. There were no further additions, and words like Deuteronomy, of course, obviously it existed before, but are lifted up. Be careful to observe only that which I enjoin upon you. And in the episode of Reformed that we saw last night, my wife and I watched, the traditional rabbi says in an interfaith dialogue where the two rabbis go at it, they take over the room and they go at it against each other, which is classically Jewish, right? A room full of non-Jews and Jews, and the two Jews take over. But he says, no, you can't change it. There's no such thing as a woman rabbi because it has never existed in Judaism. And she says, what are you talking about? Judaism is always evolutionary. By the way, I have no financial commitment or stake in reform, so I'm not pushing it on you so I can make money. I'm just pushing it because it's an interesting flick. So anyway, um, so 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 you say Dale says continuing revelation makes more sense because that's how events evolve throughout time. Yeah, I mean it sure does, right? It sure does, and it gives us a chance to really seize on this and to see it as a source in Torah. And that's my second question. Which principle of law giving do you prefer? One event or continuing revelation? And I just want to say it creates a major challenge for liberal Jews in how we use language. So do we say when God gave the Torah, when we talk to our kids about Torah, do we say God said, or do we say when our tradition holds that the Torah was given on Mount Sinai, or do we say the Torah that we've been gifted over centuries? I mean, I know it's a little bit more cumbersome to use that kind of language, but if we truly believe in continuing revelation, should we moderate our language so that it reflects that awareness of continuing revelation? Do we give our kids on Shavuot the Torah scroll? And how do we message giving them that Torah scroll in a way that says revelation is continual? Right? Because if we do want to build this broad understanding of Jewish tradition, we need to speak in a way that reflects it. Ryan, I saw you wave at me. Yeah.
Okay, I got the hand up. I like the idea of continual revelation. I think it's a nice one. I've read a little bit about it in Maimonides. I'm not sure if he held that it ended or if it continued, but he does have some interesting thoughts on it. I do think there's some challenges to it that I think should be considered, however. One of the things that comes about, I've learned a little bit about the Shabtai fee and some of the issues that came about because of that. Um, and so it makes me think about how it's a great idea to contemplate the possibility of continued revelation and an evolution of our tradition, but also that there needs to be some critical thought to it as well so that we would avoid some catastrophes like that. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well said. That look, if you really embrace continuing revelation, then Christianity can be seen as a legitimate form of continuing revelation, and so can Islam, right? So yes, so there have to be boundaries. And that's what Jews for Jesus, they're basically saying, yeah, we're the ultimate in continuing revelation. We've now discovered that you can be Jewish and embrace Jesus. And what we who represent normative Judaism basically say, no, no, there have to be boundaries. There have to be places where you can't cross, even within the realm of continuing revelation. The problem is, and my friend David Steinberg from the Torah.com hit that boundary with his own community. So here's a Haredi community where David Steinberg said, I still consider myself Haredi. I still consider myself a Torah Jew. But his family says, no, 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 you crossed over the line. Because as soon as you admit that the Torah evolved over centuries, written by many sources and not at one time by God, you're outside of our boundaries. So where do we draw the boundaries that say this is Judaism, this going too far? Yeah, and there are people who say, women rabbi, too far, right? Intermarriage, too far. Gay marriages, too far. Whereas we say, what are you talking about? Right? We're the yeah, absolutely. Did I freeze? No. Okay, we're back. I did freeze, but I'm back. Sorry, I just got an internet unstable. So yeah, yeah. So Ken, go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, Elu ve'elu, we can have Ma'amad HaSinai, and we can have continuing revelation via the prophets. And also, I think we can have continuing revelation via HaSinai as well. We have Matan Torah, and it's up to us in each generation to interpret that Torah as we see it.
Again, yes. And then I think that's sort of the beauty of our diversity as a liberal Jewish community. Even what I love at Stephen Wise is we have 5 rabbis, and each of us have different ideas, and we kind of toss them out to our community, and they have to deal with the contradictions. And yeah, and there are rabbis who are profoundly in the liberal Jewish context who say something happened at Sinai, and then there are rabbis who say no, Sinai was a fabrication of our ancestors to sort of create this notion of a theophany that was witnessed by a nation, because we wanted a national theophany, right? So we have both of those things in our tradition, and the tradition is broad enough. Where it becomes problematic for us is when the rigidity when we risk rigidity that results in sort of the pushing outside of our fences of folks who maybe we would do better to have on the inside. And let me give you an example of where we're encountering it. And it's not about, I'm not even going to, this is not a judgment. It's more of an observation. So please don't take any more of it. But the whole debate in Judaism right now about what constitutes support of Israel or lack thereof within the Jewish community, right? So we're debating, what does it mean to be a Zionist? Can you be an anti-Zionist and part of the Jewish community? Right? What does it mean to, right? So we're having a debate right now that it really goes to boundaries in ways that have not been discussed that are relevant now that Israel exists, but before that time were not necessarily. What does it mean to be a Jew with respect to Israel? Where are the boundaries? What's in, what's out? So it's a complicated question. All right, I think I need to stop to give you all a little bio break or a lunch break if you're on the East Coast, or if you're on the West Coast, whatever it is you want to do at 10 o'clock in the morning. But again, thanks so much for being a part of this. I hope I provided you with some food for thought. And if I shook you up just a little bit, that's what I like to do. That's I think the way that education helps us is it challenges our assumptions. Chag Sameach, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Chag Sameach. Thank you very much, Rabbi Stern. Thank you for joining us in